In episode 27, Select Identity and Credential Technologies That Scale, we connect your identity choices directly to security, usability, and long-term operational sustainability. Identity is one of those areas where shortcuts seem attractive early, but every compromise tends to come back as complexity, fragility, or avoidable incidents. The technologies and patterns you choose shape how hard or easy it is to roll out better protections, respond to threats, and support new business models later. This episode treats identity not as a narrow authentication problem, but as an ongoing design decision that must age well as the organization and its systems grow. When identity is handled this way, it becomes an enabler rather than a constant source of firefighting. A good starting point is to evaluate the main categories of authentication factors and the contextual risk signals that enrich them. The classic factor types are possession, inherence, and knowledge. Something you have, something you are, and something you know. Possession includes physical or virtual tokens and devices. Inherence typically refers to biometrics like fingerprints or face recognition. Knowledge usually means passwords or PINs. Contextual risk signals layer on top of these factors, looking at device posture, location, time of day, past behavior, and other attributes that help gauge whether a sign-in attempt is likely legitimate. When you evaluate factors through this lens, you can design combinations that deliver both strong assurance and tolerable user friction. Within that factor landscape, it is increasingly important to prefer phishing-resistant authenticators whenever your environment can support them. Devices and protocols associated with FIDO2, modern platform authenticators, and passkeys are designed specifically to resist common phishing techniques by binding credentials to particular sites and not exposing reusable secrets. These authenticators handle cryptographic operations in the background, presenting users with simple gestures while still providing strong assurance to relying services. The decision is not simply to turn on these methods everywhere, but to introduce them thoughtfully where risk, user readiness, and device support align. Over time, a planned shift toward phishing-resistant options can significantly reduce your exposure to credential theft and replay. Identity that grows with the organization tends to be centralized and based on open standards rather than bespoke schemes. Protocols such as OpenID Connect, OAuth 2.0, and SAML assertions provide well-understood frameworks for authenticating users and delegating authorization across systems. Centralizing identity with these standards means applications can rely on shared tokens and claims rather than embedding their own login pages and password stores. It also enables consistent policy enforcement, easier integration with external partners, and smoother transitions when you modernize components. When identity lives in a central platform, you can evolve controls once and benefit across the entire estate. Credential storage models should be chosen to minimize the number and sensitivity of secrets that must be handled directly. Asymmetric key approaches, where a private key remains on a device or secure enclave and only public keys are shared, reduce the blast radius of storage breaches compared to large password databases. Even when passwords remain part of the picture, they should be salted, hashed, and wrapped in protections that treat them as toxic assets. Service credentials and API keys can also benefit from similar thinking, moving toward patterns where long-lived shared secrets are replaced with short-lived verifiable tokens. When the overall model favors asymmetric and ephemeral credentials, attackers have less to steal and less time to exploit what they find. Technologies alone are not enough. You need lifecycle workflows that manage identities and credentials from start to finish. These workflows include proofing, where the organization verifies that a person or workload is who it claims to be before issuing credentials.
Issuance defines how those credentials are delivered, bound to devices or accounts, and recorded. Rotation and revocation procedures describe how you change or invalidate credentials over time, whether in response to routine schedules, role changes, or suspected compromise. Recovery processes address what happens when a user loses access to authenticators in a way that restores access without opening an easy path for imposters. When these workflows are documented and implemented, identity systems remain accurate and trustworthy as conditions change. Delegated authorization is now a normal part of modern architectures, and it must be supported safely using scopes, consent, and token audience restrictions. Scopes allow you to define fine-grained permissions that describe exactly what an application can do on a user's behalf, limiting each integration to what it truly needs. Consent flows, where appropriate, inform users about which access they are granting and to whom, adding transparency and control. Token audience restrictions make sure that a token issued for one service cannot silently be replayed against another, reducing unintended sharing of privileges. Together, these elements make delegation a managed capability rather than a vague trust extension. Tokens sit at the heart of many identity systems, so hardening them is essential if you want choices that scale securely. Short lifetimes limit the value of stolen tokens and create natural points where risk signals can be reevaluated. Binding techniques, such as tying tokens to specific devices, clients, or channels, reduce the chance that a token captured in one context can be replayed elsewhere. Additional replay protections, such as nonce use or strict validation of token issuance times, provide further assurance. Least privilege claims ensure that tokens carry only the minimal information and rights needed for their intended purpose, reducing the damage from unintended exposure. Federation introduces its own challenges, so planning trust between identity providers and relying parties needs as much rigor as any other control. Metadata validation ensures that federation relationships are configured correctly and point to the expected endpoints and keys. Key rollover strategies describe how signing keys will be changed over time without disrupting service, and how consuming systems will detect and adopt those changes safely. Failure isolation approaches, such as limiting which systems rely on a particular upstream identity provider, help contain the effects if something goes wrong. When federation trust is treated as a carefully managed boundary rather than a one-time configuration, it can support growth without uncontrolled fragility. Visibility into authentication behavior is critical, which means instrumenting telemetry to detect anomalies and risky sign-in patterns. Telemetry can capture signals like unusual geographic access, impossible travel scenarios, atypical device fingerprints, or sudden shifts in failure rates. Analytics on this data help you differentiate between benign changes, like a planned rollout, and potential attacks, such as credential stuffing or targeted account takeover attempts. Over time, this telemetry can feed adaptive controls that adjust required factors based on observed risk. A well-instrumented identity layer becomes not only a gatekeeper, but an ongoing sensor for broader security posture. Human users are only half the story. Scalable identity designs also accommodate service identities and workloads. Workload identities can represent applications, containers, or functions as first-class entities with their own life cycles, avoiding the overuse of shared secrets embedded in configuration files. Short-lived credentials for these identities force regular reissuance, limiting the window for misuse if they are exposed. Tying workload identities to deployment pipelines and runtime environments creates clear ownership and traceability for their actions. When machines and services are treated as identities in their own right, You gain a coherent model for controlling and auditing non-human activity. Even the most robust identity designs need a plan for extreme circumstances, which is where break glass access comes in. Break glass accounts or paths are reserved for emergencies when normal authentication mechanisms are unavailable or severely impaired. They must be guarded by strict controls, including limited availability, strong separation from everyday operations, and clear approval requirements to use them. Tamper-evident logging around any break glass activity is essential, capturing who triggered it, why, and what actions were taken under that elevated access. Well-designed break glass mechanisms provide safety without becoming a quiet shortcut for routine work. As you step back, the key themes in scalable identity and credential technologies form a coherent system. You evaluate factors thoughtfully, prefer phishing-resistant authenticators, and centralize identity using interoperable standards. You choose credential models that minimize long-lived secrets, implement end-to-end lifecycle workflows, and support safe delegation and hardened tokens. You plan federation trust relationships, instrument telemetry for continuous insight, incorporate workload identities, and define tightly controlled break glass options. This pattern aligns security with usability and operational reality, rather than treating them as competing goals. To translate these ideas into action, it helps to identify one upgrade path that offers a clear improvement in both assurance and usability. For many organizations, piloting phishing-resistant authenticators with a motivated group of users or a high-risk population is a practical starting point. This pilot gives you early evidence about real-world behavior, support needs, and integration nuances before broader rollout. As you collect and review that evidence, you can refine your lifecycle workflows, telemetry, and documentation. In doing so, you turn identity choices from static technology selections into an evolving, scalable capability that will support your environment for years. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.